So as I established in my last video, Deltarune fleshes out the diegetic logistics of connection between the real world and the game's world that uniquely goes deeper than the meta-narrative seen in Undertale. As I said in that video, this is done by diegetically connecting the player to the game. What I want to focus on in this video is the mysterious character, or rather disembodied voice, which manages this connection. If you read the title of this video, you already know who I, and any other rational person, believe this is, and that is Gaster, which I can guarantee that you will agree with after watching this video. So that asks the question, what does he have to gain from connecting this otherworldly being to his reality? Or in other words, why did Gaster connect the player to Deltarune? Now, I'm sure that set off headcanon alarms for at least a few of you, but I can assure you that every aspect of what I just said will be explained in this video. As in this video, I plan to scour every crevice of Deltarune with even the slightest of Gaster residue. Since, sadly, that's just the current state of theorizing about Gaster, all evidence surrounding him can be put into two groups, ones that are directly connected to him, and ones that are indirectly connected to him. And given the scarcity of direct evidence, it's inevitable that basically any claim further than Gaster has something to do with Deltarune will have to at least dip its toes into indirect evidence. So think of this video like building a wall. The bricks won't stand on their own, so I'll need to fill in the gaps with some soft mortar to be able to aggregate the raw materials of the evidence into the actual finished product of this theory. Because of this, the analytical part of this video will be divided into two parts: indirect evidence, the mortar, and direct evidence, the bricks. Everything that these pieces of evidence establish, I'll be recording on this brain rot meter I found in the garbage to express the actual plausibility of every precedent. If you do find my reasoning as flawed in any of these, feel free to comment, as I managed to respond to every single one of my past videos, with some exceptions. Anyways, with that out of the way, I guess there's nothing left to do but begin. Actually, before I move on, how do you like the new set for this video? I got bored of the apocalypse, so I looked around and found this house with its door open. Convenient, right? But anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. Let's get back to the video. I'd like to start off with the mysterious Valentine's card from the latest newsletter, since it's rather fresh and topical. Though, sadly, what's topical about this is if Gaster was even the one who wrote it. But after my analysis, I'm sure you'll be a diehard Gaster writer believer. So, there are two main points of this letter that are useful to my theory. First is the writer's reference to time in the real world, wishing the reader a happy new year, as this was written a bit after New Year's. Though, oddly, there's a sort of unfamiliarity the writer has to time, which, I don't know about you, but who else, including Toby Fox themselves, would be capable of observing the real world but also unfamiliar with time? It's almost like the writer of this was shattered across time and space, as what I just mentioned is the product of a warped time and space. The second intriguing part of this letter is that it's asking the reader about Deltarune, almost like they're catering to the player, who is clearly the reader of this letter. Interestingly, Deltarune is written just like it is in the legend, which very much points toward... Despite the godliness of that transition, Gaster creating the legend is likely the most speculative piece of evidence I will be analyzing, so I'll try to stack as much as I can in its favor. Despite the legend appearing to be the most important knowledge a Darkner can possess, very little actually know it. It's referenced by a few of Chapter 1 Darkners, but explicitly none from Chapter 2, which is surprising to even Rouse, who is seemingly the most knowledgeable of the legend. Speaking of Rouse, it's very subtly revealed that he knows the player's name, which is only said once during the Gonnermaker sequence to who is likely Gaster, which I'll get back to later. Because of these points, and the general mystery of the legend, some have speculated that Gaster created it, or is at least using it as a way to guide the fun gang / the player into some sort of overarching plan. Though, if he does turn out to have created the legend, it wouldn't actually prove much, as the actual intentions and credibility of Gaster and the legend are unknown, though it would certainly cement his calculated influence over Deltarune's story. Gaster being shattered across time and space is very important to this theory, so I've dedicated a whole section to it in order to nail down its plausibility. This precedent is relatively straightforward, as he is currently not readily present in Deltarune, which, given the loosely parallel lives characters between Undertale and Deltarune live, this could certainly point toward him being shattered across time and space like he was in Undertale. Though given that Undertale-Deltarune parallels are not perfect reflections, another aspect supporting this is Entry 17, which is undoubtedly Gaster's discovery of Dark Worlds through some kind of experiment that alludes to another experiment which ends up being a cliffhanger. So it's fair to assume this very, very interesting experiment was the event that shattered Gaster across time and space. So while this precedent certainly belongs in the indirect section of evidence, it's still very established in my eyes with its parallels to Undertale. The reason behind Gaster being the Eggman is the fact that eggs are one of the two only items that aren't transformed between the light and dark world. the second one being shadow crystals, which have an elaborate but still direct connection to Gaster, which I'll explain later. What makes this useful is that Gaster being the Eggman sets the precedent that he is capable of manifesting himself in Dark Worlds, even if in a sort of non-physical way. Now that we have the mortar, it's time to move on to bricks of evidence that have actual direct connections to the admittedly very limited dataset we have of Gaster, things like his theme, or entry 17 and its theme of garbage noise. So, to put it simply, no more Gaster residue beyond this point. Anyway, speaking of Gaster's theme, its fallout can be seen all over Deltarune's OST. Andrew Cunningham has already covered this in a video which I'll link in the description. It's much more in depth than I could ever be, so every time I use musical similarities, I'll put Nikola Tesla on the screen as a way of telling you to go watch the video. But in short, Gaster's presence in many of the game's songs, similar to him creating a legend, point toward his influence over Deltarune's story as a whole. Gaster's association with the bunker is relatively straightforward. The ambient noise of the bunker, when sped up to 666, a number commonly tied to Gaster, uncovers that the ambience is actually just Gaster's theme slowed down. This doesn't really establish anything further than his connection to the bunker, as it's unknown whether he is currently in there, or he was in there before he was shattered across time and space. Though, given the rather heavy foreshadowing, it's likely that we are going to find out what's inside, which is arguably the most currently plausible location for the climax of the story, with all the deep potential it has. Gaster being at least the first voice in the Gonnermaker has two direct connections, first being the fact that the game closes when you input his name, and second being the theme of the Gonnermaker, another hymn, which not only references him in the title,
they must have amnesia, they forgot that I'm him,
but also the song itself is an almost identical copy to Gaster's theme. What this actually establishes is that Gaster created the player's connection to Deltarune, as the beginning of the Gonnermaker is the beginning of the game. The very first lines of Deltarune are Gaster asking the player if they are connected. So, why is this important? Well, as we've already established, Gaster is capable of at least a limited observation of the real world, which would make sense if he is capable of creating a bridge to it. What this could point toward is Gaster having a motivation for creating this connection, other than something like, for science. Which is nice, because we're approaching an answer to why Gaster connected the player to Deltarune without even diving too deep into the lore pit. Though, it won't stay that way. The answer isn't complete yet. Given that Gaster connected the player to Deltarune, that would almost certainly mean that they are the one that manages the player's save files, as the voice of the save file selection menu is identical to the one of the Gonnermaker. This is further supported by the scientific language of his voice when manipulating save files, as to put it simply, Gaster's a scientist. This helps support Gaster's calculated influence over Deltarune, and is catering toward the player. To explain why we know Gaster was the mysterious entity that contacted Jevil and Spamton, there are two reasons. First is again the similarities of themes surrounding them, including the freedom motif they share to Gaster's theme. And second, being the very subtle reference to garbage noise coming from the phone which Spamton used to contact the entity that drove them mad. Which is the same description of when you attempt to use Kris's phone in the Dark World, as it plays the same audio from entry 17, which is written by Gaster. Gaster being the entity that contacted the secret bosses establishes many things about him. It proves that he is capable of communicating with Dark Worlds, holds forbidden meta-knowledge that drives Jevil and Spamton mad, making them, quote, see the world as a game, which makes a lot of sense if he can observe the real outside world, but most importantly for this theory, it proves that he is the one that gave the secret bosses their shadow crystals. These shadow crystals are crucial to my theory, as they're likely the greatest insight of this video, so I'll be going all out in my analysis of them. What we need to know for this theory is what these crystals actually are, which I'll start by answering what they do. Shadow crystals have very strange use descriptions. In Dark Worlds, they allow you to see through darkness, showing its Light World counterpart location. But more confusingly, in the Light World, they seemingly show a reality where the person looking through it never existed. Or at least, that's the best explanation for what it does, since it either makes Kris see through their hand, or see Susie glaring at Kris, possibly implying that Susie never developed from being an outcasted bully. Needless to say, these descriptions aren't very consistent, and likely don't fully explain what shadow crystals do. Though what is helpful is the loose assumptions on how they may link back to Gaster. Their Dark World usage could possibly be alluding to some sort of darker than dark double negative, seeing that you are using a shadow crystal in a dark world to see the light world. And their Light World usage may be referencing Gaster's redaction from Deltarune, If these descriptions are pointing to anything, it's that shadow crystals share traits of Gaster. Speaking about traits of Gaster, another interesting aspect of shadow crystals is that if you have not obtained them by missing a secret boss, you can reload that chapter's previous save file, beat the secret boss, and have it mysteriously appear in Castletown. This is incredibly strange when you consider that this means shadow crystals are recorded beyond save files. They don't exist relative to Deltarune's time, but rather the time of the real world, or at least the time of the diegetic save file menu. I'm sure you're wondering where I'm getting at with all these comparisons to Gaster, so I'd like to share what inspired me to make this video in the first place. One detail of Gaster that's always stuck with me is the fact that he was quite literally shattered across time and space, as one of Gaster's followers that you encounter in Undertale is holding a literal piece of him. If you aren't picking up where I'm going with this, I'll lay it out straight. Gaster and the Shadow Crystals share a lot of unique connections and characteristics as I mentioned earlier. And Gaster's been shattered into pieces which were scattered, just like how Shadow Crystals, shards of some unspeakable substance that combine into powerful tools, are scattered across the Dark Worlds. As you can now see, Shadow Crystals are shattered fragments of Gaster, the consequence of his experimentation with Dark Worlds, leaving him trapped in the fabric of Deltarune's world. Redacted from existence, he searched for some way to regain his physical form. Luckily for him, he stood in the very substance in which all creation was built on, leaving countless opportunities for him to uncover. What he needed was some agent which would travel to the many worlds which he was scattered across, seeking all the secrets they held. And what he found was us, the player, a determined entity driven by one thing: completionism. So he created a bridge, a connection between these two worlds, only needing to nudge us along from time to time on our ultimate mission to put him back together. That is why Gaster connected the player to Deltarune. Inevitably, in some future chapter, just as we must in Chapter 3, we will have to combine all the Shadow Crystals on the pretense of some unrivaled power, only for it to reincarnate the very one who brought us here. After that, all we can do is hope the devil plays nicely. And doesn't just, kick us out or something. That would suck. Whew, another video down. I hope the extra length of this one was worth the extra wait time. If you didn't know, this video is about 10 days behind my original deadline. This is because of a multitude of things. First is, as I mentioned, the longer length of the video, but I've also just generally been more busy with things like school beginning to wrap up. In fact, it sucks to say this, but I'm going to have to take a short hiatus to making videos like these. It won't be long, and I'm sure I'll get some small things out in the meantime, but right now I have to focus on some other things. I'd also like to mention my complete hatred for my current editing software. It's called Clipchamp, and it's literally the Microsoft Paint of video editing softwares. Seriously, it comes pre-installed on Windows. Needless to say, it's barely capable of producing the videos I make. Near the end of editing any of my videos, it slows to a snail's pace, and it's unbearable. Because of this, I may try to replace it for any of my future projects. I've looked into DaVinci Resolve, and it seems pretty good, if I manage to learn it. Of course, I'd also like to mention that I really like the theory for this video. It was actually one that I loosely came up with before I was competent enough to make videos like these. It answers a few big questions whilst staying relatively cautious in my opinion. Though I can certainly see some people disagreeing with some of my points, which is why I chose to structure the video the way I did. If you're going to take anything from this video, it is that Shadow Crystals are the fragmented pieces of Gaster, and if you don't agree with that, the comment section is always open. Anyways, that should be everything I have to talk about. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and also, speaking of subscribing, thank you all so much for 1,000 subscribers. This milestone is a true reminder of how meaningful and fulfilling this channel is. The fact that I have a genuine outing for my ideas on something I hold so dearly that is enjoyed by other people is truly one of the greatest privileges to have. I'm gonna be dead honest, I have literally jumped for joy when I've been notified of things like people sharing my videos, and just generally any time someone has enjoyed what I've made. The validation it gives you is it's just magical. So just thank you guys, truly, from the bottom of my heart. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I might see you in a month.
I'm killing you. I'm killing you. I don't care about anything else. I don't give a shit about anything else.